wants to respond. Can I ask Amy or Ami, Olivia, and Raphael to go ahead?
Sorry about that. Okay, so thank you. Let's give everyone a little round of applause for that. Just taking the step of standing up and asking a question in front of an audience could be a really big step for someone, so it's important that we affirm that. So anyway, the first question about the local Bronx Democratic Party. I think it's a really excellent question. It actually speaks to the structure of just county Democratic parties in the city in general. They are not, the rules that go into governing local parties are very arcane, which means like they're very complicated. And the more complicated these systems are, the harder it is for everyday people to participate in them. So, you know, in terms of helping make that system more simple, I think is something that we really should focus on. One step that is really important, and I was just speaking to someone, right over here, what was your name? David. So David is a constituent here, and he's a Bronx resident. He did a really amazing thing after our primary, which is that he ran for county committee. And a lot of people don't know about county committee. Yeah, let's give him a round of applause. Don't know what county committee is. County committee is like the most granular, easy way to get involved in local politics as an individual. So what you can do is that you can run for county committee. You can go to your name. It's like basically being the mayor of your block. So that is how small the actual system, the actual like area is. Sometimes it's even half a block. So they literally draw a mini district around a handful of buildings, and you are the committee person for those couple of buildings. And it seems like a really small thing. It's volunteer. County committee meets pretty infrequently. They change. Some of them meet as infrequently as once every 2 years. But it's very powerful. Because in New York City, about 1 out of every 3 seats is decided via special election. And the people who decide who the Democratic nominee is going to be in that special election is the county committee. So you can help decide about 1 out of every 3 elected officials in the city. One of the issues that can be really difficult sometimes to get in county committee, in Queens, it was even crazier. But in terms of what I would like to do, I would like to, and as we have been this summer, amplify a lot of the continuing effort to educate people about what county committee is, because it's kind of deliberately left a little bit under the radar. Educate people how they can get involved and amplify the work of organizers like Bronx Progressives to help people get plugged into that process, because sometimes it's not even about left and what I often tell people is that I don't believe that our politics are about left and right. I think they're about top and down. And I think what I try to do is advocate for working class, middle class, and poor families to make sure that they have the basic economic dignity that they have worked so hard for and deserve. So, but one of the ways that we need to do that is also simplify our democracy. So, now I'm going to talk. Okay. So that's Bronx.
Thank you.
No problem. The second one is on projects for Puerto Rico. And this is such an important and dear issue to not just me, but to so many Bronxites. The Bronx has, and New York City has one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Puerto Rican diaspora in the country. And so all of us know someone that is impacted in one way or another, whether it's a family member or a friend, by the hurricane. So one of the things that we are doing actually is that we are on a legislative level, because you asked about what we're doing with DC, we are working on implementing and proposing a Marshall Plan for Puerto Rico in the House. So what we need to do is that we are advocating for a very large investment to transition Puerto Rico to renewable energy and to transition it to rebuild the infrastructure, and not even rebuild, but to kind of transition to infrastructure that is sustainable on the island, and have that be part of a much broader agenda to transition the entire country away from fossil fuels and from the pollution that has been hurting our families and our children and contributing to the increased rise in these storms. So right now, the Marshall Plan in the Senate has been introduced by Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Elizabeth Warren. It's also been co-sponsored by Kamala Harris, Kirsten Gillibrand, I believe, Cory Booker, but there's no companion bill in Congress yet. So we can't get this stuff passed unless we have a champion in the House. So one of the things that we're looking into is seeing if we can propose and champion that companion legislation in the House so that we can get that investment, because Puerto Rico received a fraction of the FEMA recovery funds, as Houston did in Hurricane Harvey, as Florida did in Hurricane Irma, as we did in Hurricane Sandy. And Houston's just one city. It was the entire island of Puerto Rico that was demolished. And so it's not to say that those places shouldn't have gotten that funding, but it's to say those people deserve an equitable amount of funding as well. And so that's one of the things that we're doing with response to the storm. We also need to work with FEMA, because there's a lot of people that were made homeless by the storm that moved to New York, and now their FEMA funds are being cut off, but their homes have not been rebuilt back home. So they're stuck in a limbo. So we're working on extending some of that FEMA funding there. And then lastly, really we need to address the basic colonial status of Puerto Rico in the current day. And we need to acknowledge that it is an injustice to be born an American citizen and not be allowed to vote for president, to not have federal representation, to not have a member of Congress, to not have a senator. That is not okay. It's not okay. And so one of the things that we're also working toward is a legitimate self-determination for the island, because people say, oh, they voted for statehood before, but if you've noticed, regardless of the outcome of that vote, it never actually happens. And people deserve to have the representation that they want and the status that they want. So that's for Puerto Rico. And then lastly, the question on Pfizer cutting research and Parkinson's. It's such an excellent question, and thank you for asking it. I don't know where you are. Thank you so much for asking it. So this is, so Pfizer is a private company, and they are cutting back their research funding and allocations to a lot of important diseases. And this is not just happening with Pfizer, this is happening with a lot of pharmaceutical corporations across the board. And it's because of the fact that a lot of rules have been rolled back for the way these corporations can operate, which means that they can cut back on how much they're spending in research, but then spend more on inflating their stock prices. So a lot of what the basic things that we need to do is implement very strong rules. And they're actually Wall Street rules that we need to implement in order to rein in some of this misbehavior, because then what they are able to do is put it on the government's bill to do all of that research, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but then here's what happens. We as taxpayers pay for the government to invest in pharmaceutical or in drug research. Then that drug research leads to a lot of breakthroughs, but then these pharmaceutical companies take that research, then they patent it basically, and then they turn it to medications. And so all of that money that we paid as taxpayers, we do not get back in terms of the medications that turned into. So one aspect is that we have to change that. We have to change that system. And if we are spending tax money on that kind of research, then we need to treat it as an investment. And we deserve a return on the investment that we make as taxpayers into solving some of our most important and frontline diseases. But then the other thing is also addressing something known as stock buybacks. This is getting a little bit into the weeds, but actually this word, stock buybacks, explains a lot of what is happening to our economy today. So we all see, you hear people on the news saying the economy is better than ever, the economy is better than ever, right? And that's regardless of partisanship sometimes. Democratic presidents say it, Republican presidents say it, they say the economy is better than ever. But our wages have not increased in 30 years when you peg it to inflation. Everyday working people are making the same, but you keep hearing on the news that the economy is doing better and better and better. But that's because what they talk about when they talk about the economy is that they're talking about the stock market. But most Americans, or a large percentage of Americans, do not have any stake in the stock market. They're really working paycheck to paycheck. Some of us are blessed to have something like a 401k or a pension, especially if you are a union worker. But a lot of people, especially if you work retail, if you are a home healthcare aide, if you do some of these really big, or if you're part of one of these really big industries, if you work in restaurants, you don't have a stake in the stock market. This thing, stock buybacks, what corporations are allowed to do is buy their own stocks. And when a corporation is allowed to buy their own stock, then that drives up the price of the stock almost artificially. And so then the higher the stock gets paid, CEO pay is tied to stock price pay. So when you hear about these CEOs making tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, it's because their pay is pegged to the stock price. So anytime they get a tax break, what we saw with this $2 trillion GOP tax break, that tax break largely went to corporations and the very, 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 very rich. Like we're talking about hundreds of millions of billionaires. And so when those people get a tax cut, I'm sorry about that. What they do is that they go straight to buying those stocks back. Thank you so much. They go straight to buying those stocks back, driving up the price. But then none of those resources, like the Republicans in Congress right now, they made the argument that if they get those tax cuts, they'll take that money and they'll invest it. But we saw that none of that has happened because trickle down does not work. So to address your question, some of the things that we need to do, we need to make sure that if government is investing in research, that we have a stake in what happens. Anything that is developed from that research, there should be kind of a payback on that investment. And then the other thing that we need to do is regulate stock buybacks, so that not just pharmaceutical companies, but all sorts of companies don't have to focus on the well-being of everyday people, not just the number on the stock ticker. And so I think that was all three. So let's hear the next one.
Hi, so my name is Rafael. I live just a few blocks away from here. And well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for being here. I wanted to say congratulations on winning your primary a few months ago. And my question is about immigration, because I'm an immigrant activist. You tweeted a few weeks ago that abolishing ICE does not mean abolishing deportations. However, for many immigrant activists like myself, abolishing ICE does mean abolishing deportations, or at least we still have those two goals that we're striving towards. So my question for you is, why not join us?
I'm Morris Park, and my question is about your relationship with the kind of establishment of the Democratic Party. Now that you're in and you're in the party, you recently spoke in support of Cuomo, and I know that I saw your debate with Crowley, and he sort of tried to wangle an endorsement out of you, and he said, "Well, I'm part of the movement. I'll take it back to the movement and see what they say." So now you're speaking in support of Cuomo, and I'm wondering if that's because you're seeing that support of Cuomo from your movement, your community, or if there are other reasons and what that relationship is going to be like. Because a lot of people, I think, rooting for you as a kind of internal opposition to politicians.
Hi, my name is Olivia. So I was watching your interview you did with DeRay McKinson, the Black Lives Matter, and wanted to like do more like research into like your stand on African American issues and so underreported. But like unemployment, healthcare, obviously that applies to everybody. But I was more focused on like what is your specific like plan, like target specifically African Americans with like police involved with all these shootings with African Americans, also Black Lives Matter movement. There hasn't been that much on that. So mine was just overall like the Black community, like specific targeted issues.
Thank you so much. All right, give them a round of applause.
Oh, before I let you go to respond, can we have Joey, Eggley, and Angela please line up?
Thank you all so much. These are three really, really great questions. And I think a lot of them, they point to like kind of a similar dynamic in that it's weird because before like the primary election and all of the, like it just exploded, everything just exploded. The press coverage of us just really blew up, our Twitter following really blew up, the amount of national attention that we received was, and like continue to receive, was nowhere in the scope of what we thought would happen. So it's taking time a little bit, and it's definitely an adjustment period. You know, a year ago, I was working downtown in restaurants, and then it was like literally, you know, my life and just the campaign's life just changed overnight. And so it's been interesting because literally in 24 hours, it went from no one wanting to pay any attention to us at all to then like everybody treating us as though we're some kind of presidential candidate or something. Like that's the extreme scrutiny. So anyways, I want to speak to that because sometimes I think that we've had moments where people either overread into a word or a situation, and it requires just, or that I humbly ask for a little generosity in these moment-to-moments, because sometimes there'll be a tweet and it's off and it's like, don't worry guys, like I'm not, and everyone's like, that's it, she's gone, she sold out, she's compromised, and it's like, I was like, sorry, my phone was dying, I had to get this out, I used the wrong word. Okay, but anyway, so the reason I say that is because of the next two things. So the first thing, the immigration question, with the like abolishing ICE and abolishing deportations, I think that when I say that, and especially with the context of, which this came from a tweet, so in the context of that tweet, I think that what was going on is that we have two things. We have, and they're not, and I'm just going to precede this by saying they're not two different things, they're not two opposite things, but they're two different tools. So we have the movements that we base our values on, that we base our platforms on, that we legislate around. And then you have the actual like political sphere of framing and how we make these arguments and how we build consensus and build community around getting these things done. So what I started to see was a fear-mongering on the right of immigrants all the time. And this idea that abolishing ICE meant that America was going to be in danger. And I think it's the opposite. I think I happen to have the belief that ICE puts Americans in danger. But anyways, all of that is to say is that what was happening is that when we were talking about abolishing ICE, they were trying to create fear around that. They were trying to create fear in saying, well, we're just going to remove everything at our border and like really create this image of people just walking in and out, in which what we say is undocumented status is dangerous in this country. It's just dangerous to be undocumented. And our goal is to document and make sure that people are safely documented as much as possible. And so when I say abolishing ICE doesn't mean abolishing deportations, I think it's because we eventually do want to create a world where deportation is not necessary for, particularly if you are a productive, peaceful member of society. But when we had, and like in that moment, the example that they had pointed out was in Queens, there was a deportation of someone who was an actual Nazi in World War II. And he was allowed to stay here while meanwhile hardworking people from Latin America were being targeted and deported. So they're making a big deal about it. And, I think for me, you're gonna be hard pressed. You're gonna be hard pressed to get me to say that convicted Nazis should stay in the country. That's just what it is. But I do think that what we do is that we work towards an outcome where deportations become less and less necessary. And I think so, how we message better on that with the movement is totally a conversation that I'm open to having. But again, our platform has not changed, and our immigration platform has not changed at all. The second question, so regarding like an endorsement of the governor, basically this was another situation where it was like a 2-minute clip on CNN that everyone is saying that like I haven't officially endorsed the governor, and I have never released a press release, I have never used that word, but I can understand why people were concerned. For me, I think it was basically, you kind of get put on these like live TV interviews, and first of all, they told me it was going to be all about Puerto Rico, and then it wasn't. And I was like, okay, great. I guess we're talking about 10 other things besides this. But anyways, so they bring this on me, and it's like, okay, I saw what was going on, and that they were, I think on television, they were trying to go to fight and like create a fight and create this little dramatic moment. And I wasn't going to take the bait of that. I didn't want to. So people are saying it's an endorsement. It's not, but it's also to say that I don't want a Republican to win the gubernatorial seat. Yeah, and so it's not like I'm like working for the man or anything. It's just, and that's what I said. I am hoping that all Democrats that we're supporting, now that the primaries are over, we're able to replace and make sure that we're pushing for progressive policies, and people have kind of run that into like I've endorsed and like all of these things, but it's no secret that the governor's been kind of talking a little smack and saying this, that, and the other about my campaign, but that's okay. Like I'm here to say, you know what, it's all good. And because we're focused on our agenda and we're focused on our issues, and I don't want to get involved in the he said, she said, gossip, this, that, and the other. It's like, all right, you want to knock, that's fine. I'm going to support, I'm going to be the rising tide that lifts all boats. But I remain committed to my progressive causes. I remain committed to getting money out of politics. I continue to refuse and reject all corporate money from my campaign because I want to put this community first. With respect to Black issues in the African American community, first of all, I want to thank you for asking that question, because we have to, people say, why do you have to talk about, why do you have to talk about just the Black community, or why do you have to talk about just the Latino community, or this community? Because marginalized communities deserve to be uplifted and given special attention when we have had a historical history of negligence and even active discrimination. We need to earn that. And so I thank you for asking that question. As a matter of fact, one of the first organizations that ever endorsed my campaign was Black Lives Matter of Greater New York. During and throughout my campaign, it was these are really important issues. And I think you bring up a good note in that we can center these more in our conversations, but I do want you to know that we are actively acting on these things. So we have worked with a lot of criminal justice organizations. We've worked with Black Lives Matter Greater New York. We've also worked with the Akeem Browder Foundation, whose brother, Khalif Browder, was 16 years old when he was accused of stealing a backpack, just accused. He was never found guilty. He was kept in Rikers jail for 2 years, solitary confinement as a teenager. He developed, he had severe mental health issues as a result. Adolescent rape. I believe that solitary confinement is a form of cruel and unusual punishment. But he was kept and abused, and as a result committed suicide. And his brother has committed himself to reforming our criminal justice system. So we've been sitting down with organizations like his, and I've also listened to correctional officers as well, because correctional officers also want criminal justice reform too. They know that this is a messed up system. They know this is not working. This is not the ideal of what we should accept as a community. So, it's within our platform. We want to abolish cash bail so that we are not just jailing the poor. So we're working on abolishing cash bail. We're working on advocating for community civilian review boards to introduce accountability. We believe that whenever any person dies in an altercation with a police or frankly any public official, there needs to be an independent investigation. And the key word is independent. We can't have agencies investigate themselves, because what we see time and time again is that it doesn't seem impartial, and even if people claim that it's impartial, it doesn't build trust with the community. And so, in order for us to have a safer system for all people involved, in order for there to be justice within our communities, we need to embark on some of that. And so it really creates top to bottom reform. So on a federal level, we advocate abolishing cash bail. We also advocate for increased investment in transitionatory services, because I remember a year ago, even when I was working in restaurants, I met this guy. He was a line cook, and he was 25 years old. He just got the job because he had just gotten out of prison. And I asked him when he first got in, he said 15. So he was picked up probably for some very small marijuana offense when he was 15 years old, and then spent the next most formative years of his life behind bars. And then when that person leaves, they do not have the education that they should have. They do not have the skill set that they should have to successfully reintegrate into society and pick up the pieces. And that in and of itself triggers a cycle of intergenerational poverty. So what we need to do is make sure that we're investing in these transitionatory services, because it makes us better as a community. We are better off with more skilled people, period. And when a person has served their time, we also advocate for blocking the box as well, because when a person commits a crime and is sentenced to the crime, the sentence is their punishment. And when they serve their punishment, that is the penance that they paid to society. And that penance should be done when they are finished serving their sentence. And we shouldn't continue to punish people. If we felt that they deserved a longer sentence, then that judge gives them a longer sentence according to that crime. But those are some of the things that we advocate for and that we do.
I've watched you on TV, on your interviews, and you did pretty good. I know how important it is for Democrats to win. You have to win, because there's too much going on. But my concern is how the Republicans are using the word socialist. And the reason I'm concerned with it, I don't think there's much here in New York, but my wife was Cuban, and we went to Cuba, where they got dictatorships, they got socialism, and not good. So I know in Miami, but I think it's going to be a problem, labeling them as socialists. So you do to overcome people's fear and their ignorance? You know, what can you do?
My name is Sigmund. My question is in regards to voting. In general elections, it tends to be like the voters turn out like 50%, even lower in the primaries. As a candidate, what can you do like for influence people to just go out and vote? Right? So to be more
Can't hear you.
involved in the election. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Angela Torres, and as a mother and a person who's very involved in the community in terms of the education system, my question is, what do you see as the biggest, because we all know that there's a broken system, so what do you see as the biggest obstacles in the education system, and how do you plan on addressing it, especially on a local level, not just your position, but also especially coming from the Bronx, how do you see it? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give them a round.
Before I attend your response, let me ask Sharon, Jeroen, and Tiffany.
So one by one with these questions. So the first question I think is a really good one because it also speaks again to the fear that other people are trying to kind of stoke and create around others, because that's what the right does. That's what a lot of people do in their politics, is that they give you something to be scared of instead of giving you values to vote for. And so that's one of the big things that's happening. When people say, "Oh, socialist, socialist, socialist," and for anyone who was around during our campaign, that's not how we campaigned. We weren't knocking on people's door and saying, "Hey, socialist, socialist, socialist." That's not what we did. We were knocking on people's door and saying, "We believe in improved and expanded Medicare for all." We knocked on people's doors and we said, "We believe in a living wage. We believe in tuition-free college for our children. We believe in addressing the dramatic swings in our climate. We believe in renewable energy." And that, to me, I think is what our advice is as a movement, is to always bring it back to the issues. Now, what I will say as well is that, people create so much fear, and I actually had this conversation. I joined Congressman Jerry Nadler, who is in Manhattan, for a little bit of a Q&A 2 days ago, and someone had brought this up as well. And I think it's an important conversation to have as well, because there are so many different perceptions about what this word means, because there's no one definition. There's no one definition. For me, and that's why they say, like, what does it mean? And for me, and I've said it before, is that I believe in a modern, moral, and wealthy society. No person should be too poor to live. And my interpretation of that are these policies. You don't have to call yourself anything. One of the reasons why I was so proud to have DSA's endorsement is because of what they do, not just because of what they say, but what they do. What DSA does is that they set up a table right by, I think it's like the Q44, no, one of these other bus routes. But they set up a table every Saturday, or every other Saturday this summer, and they put out coffee and donuts for families who are visiting people at Rikers. And they're saying, "We want to talk to you about ending cash bail. We want to talk to you about reforming our criminal justice system." DSA, they will set up and they will change people's brake lights for free so that they don't get pulled over by the police and get risked into a violent altercation. I'm proud to be endorsed by an organization that acts in that way. I'm really proud to do that. And so for me, I don't think the answer is to shy away, and I don't think the answer is to have a debate about an ism. It's about having a debate about our proposals. And to say, listen, this is not about that, because that's what they want to do. They want to make it about that. This is about let's actually look at what's on paper. You actually pull up my website, it says right on my website exactly what we're fighting for. We're fighting for Medicare for college, a living wage, a Green New Deal, justice for Puerto Rico, a nonviolent and decarcerated criminal justice system. These are the things, we're fighting for the same things that the vast majority of Americans believe in. Now it's something like 70% or 60% of all Americans believe in Medicare for all, including a majority of Republicans for the first time. So I believe that we're advocating for American, just like our values and who we are. And also the thing is too, is that, you know, if you're a Democrat, it doesn't matter how you identify. We just went through a presidential administration where they called Obama a socialist for 8 years anyway. So like, just, you know, accept that they're gonna call you that and say, you know what, I don't care. Like, go for it, go to town, because just always go back to the issue. Always go back to Medicare for all, always go back to a living wage, always go back to education and healthcare and all of those things, because they're trying to distract you with that conversation. And we all know that ultimately what this is about is being true to our democracy. And our democracy has been taken over by special interests, and everyday people are not being heard in our government. And that's really, I think, the radical revolution that we're trying to have, is to put government back in the hands of people. With voter turnout, voter turnout is so important. This is also something that's so important in our community. Communities and people blame themselves for not voting. They feel there's a lot of guilt around it. You know, our community has pretty low voter turnout, but actually, I think it goes both ways. In that, I think that politics, in terms of being an elected official, is all about relationships, and it's all about the relationship that you have with the community, and committing to continuing that relationship with the community. And when the community doesn't feel like there's a relationship, you don't show up, you don't turn out. And so I feel like for a very long time in the Bronx, a lot of communities have felt neglected. And so they say, what's the point? And so they don't turn out to vote. And which is why in our campaign, in our primary, we actually expanded the electorate 68% over the last off-year midterm election. And we did that by speaking directly to people who felt disenfranchised. Everyone right now in the system says, only talk to the people who already vote if you want to win an election. And we actively rejected that. And we said, you know, we know that's the common wisdom, but what we're going to try to do is actually engage more people in the process. And with that was actually a benefit that is a benefit of taking very bold policy positions. Because taking really bold policy positions is basically saying, I'm fighting for students, I'm fighting for working people, I'm fighting for hourly wage workers. By taking those really bold statements, we're talking about exactly who we're fighting for. So I tend to think that progressive movements are really primed to expand the electorate, but we also need to be our own organizers. You know, we need to send, when we know it's an election day, we gotta show up. You know, we gotta say, all right, you know, and New York doesn't make it easy. New York State, our laws, we are a voter suppression state. People don't like to say that because we're a blue state, but blue states can do a lot of bad things too, you know? And in New York State, even though we're a Democratic state, we participate in some of the worst voter suppression in the country. In 2016, we had the second lowest primary turnout in the nation, second only to Louisiana. And that's because we are one of the only states that doesn't have early voting. We don't have mail-in ballots. We don't have no excuse absentee voting. We have like 10 elections a year. And almost every other state has all their elections on the same day in terms of a primary. I think we're the only state in the country that separates federal primaries from state primaries. And the reason for that is to get you tired. Is to say, I'm gonna skip this one. Like, I don't, like, it's too much. By the time November rolls around, we would have had 4 elections this year, New York State. Would have had a special election, We would have had a federal primary, we would have had a state primary, and we would have had a general election. It's ridiculous. And so what we need to do is press our state legislatures, press our state assembly members, press our state senators, and press our governor into saying it's time that we have basically a New York Civil Rights Act. It's basically time that we have a New York voting rights movement. It really is up. You know, they say, oh, we can't do mail-in ballots or we can't do early voting because it's going to be too expensive. But we hold 4 elections a year? Come on. So we know that. So we know better. And I've traveled the country and people, they would ask me about our campaign. They're like, oh, how did you handle mail-in ballots? And it's like, we don't have mail-in ballots. And people in other countries are like, what? Literally everywhere else does this except us. And when I tell people about how we don't have mail-in ballots, we don't have early voting, we don't have any of these things, that you have to participate in a primary, you have to register as a Democrat the year before. It's outrageous that we disenfranchise independent and unaffiliated voters, that it becomes really easy, they throw you off the rolls all the time. It's so common for the state, but it's so unusual in the country. And so, one of the things that we have to do is, yes, make sure that we vote, but then also demand more of our elected officials, because every single year they say that they're going to put these reforms in the state budget, and every single year they fail to do so. So we need, next year, they're probably going to do the same thing. So next year, when they're drafting the state budget, you need to say, and we all need to stand up and say, this better happen, because if it doesn't, I'm going to be open to voting for a primary challenge. That's the only way things get done. People say, oh, don't run in a primary, that splits the party. The primary is the only, having a primary challenger is the best motivation for good behavior, sometimes from our incumbents. So, and so sometimes people say, well, why, what's the value of running in a primary? Well, because people really start behaving a lot better. And that's one base reason. I think we saw that in the gubernatorial primary, in my own primary. Win or lose, we pressured the incumbent to co-sign something like 10 really progressive pieces of legislation that he hadn't co-signed before. And so that there's a lot of progress that could be made, but we need to send that message and to say we're serious about voting reform. And the last thing, the biggest obstacle is with education reform. The Bronx and other communities like the Bronx are owed millions, up to $4 billion from the state for education. It is called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. The New York State Supreme Court ruled that the state government had been violating the constitutional rights of children by criminally underfunding our schools. And they ruled a long time ago that the state needs to provide this funding for our kids. And again, they drag their feet on it. So we need to, and you can, if you have a note, it's called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, or the CFE. You can look that up, and you can start, you write this whole laundry list. I'm going to talk to my state assemblyman. Do that. And jot those things down, because the state owes it, and we need to create that pressure. But the good thing is that when we increase voter turnout, here's the important thing. When we increase voter turnout, it causes the state to respond. Because then what they start to say is, they say, there's only a small amount of voters there. It's okay, we can kind of underfund this. It's not that many votes. But if we all turn out to November, it doesn't even matter who you vote for. All they look at is how many people voted. They can't even see how you voted. No one can see how you vote, but they can see if you voted. And if they see, oh snap, voter turnout increased 300% in this district, that's when they really start paying attention to communities. And so if we dramatically increase voter turnout in the Bronx, then any future candidate for mayor, any future candidate for AG, any statewide or citywide position will start paying a lot more attention to us. And so that's one of the really big benefits on an election day. You can start November 6th. November 6th is our chance to hit the reset button. November 6th is the day, like I always tell people, take out your phone and pull up your calendar app and just put November 6th and just put vote that day. And just set a little alarm, you know, an hour before you go to work. And I tell people that all the time. And then the night before, check in with your friends, check in with your family. You know, if you live with family, if you live with people who can vote, drag them to the polls with you. That's what I do. I say, you are not going past this day without voting. And that's what we really have to do. We have to increase voter turnout so people really start paying attention to this district and to say, I'm gonna win or lose my race based off this community. When that happens, we start to get a lot more transformation. And then, so that's kind of on a local level, and then federally, it's no secret, I believe in tuition-free public colleges and trade schools for our kids. It's so doable. In fact, with this recent tax cut, with the GOP tax cut, the amount of money that they spent on that they're kind of lowering our reserves with that tax cut, could have paid to forgive every single federal student loan in America. And instead of doing a bailout for Main Street and doing a bailout for families, we continue to choose to bail out Wall Street. We continue to choose to bail out corporations over families. And that's why I believe that tuition-free public college is the way to go. It's also really doable. And again, people say, oh, is this pie in the sky? This is impossible. Almost every modern country in the world does these things. Almost everyone. Canada has a single-payer system. The UK has a single-payer system that's even more socialized than Medicare for all. And what we find in these countries is that their health outcomes as a society are way better. Way better. And their costs are much lower. We pay